Carl Bernstein nailed it. Truth is not up for debate. It's not a matter of opinion. It's what the evidence shows. I'm Steve Swatt. In the next half hour, I'll be talking to 3 journalists about an issue extremely important, not only to the news media, but to society at large. And that is telling the truth during a time of misinformation, and especially political truth. Let me introduce our guests. First, Veranda Lyons. She is a reporter, an investigative reporter for Cal Matters, which is a news organization based in Sacramento. She is absolutely dedicated to holding public officials and government officials accountable. Next, we have Wayne Friedman, who spent 30 years working for KGO in San Francisco, and he is the author of a book called It Takes More Than Good Looks to Succeed at TV Reporting. And finally, we have Rebecca LaVally, who's a former bureau chief in Sacramento for United Press International and Gannett News Services. She is a co-author or author of numerous papers and books, including Paving the Way, Women's Struggle for Political Equality in California. She has a PhD in communications studies, and she's currently teaching at Sacramento State University. Thank you all for being with us. Rebecca, let's start with you. Let's talk about the general role of journalists in this day and age. When I started reporting in the mid-1970s, political reporting, I had to note to the hour, to the minute, to the second, how much time I devoted to each candidate. And hopefully by the end of the campaign, everything equaled out. I bring that up because I saw a recent Pew Research poll. It was done in 2022. It interviewed and surveyed 12,000 journalists, and fewer than half, 44%, said equality is important and they should strive for equality, but 55% said equality wasn't that important. So I'm kind of curious, what's your take on that?
Well, back in the day, Steve, you were under the dictates of the fairness doctrine, which required broadcasters to tell both sides of the story. And that FCC doctrine, Federal Communications Commission doctrine, went away under the Reagan administration. Now, I don't know, maybe things haven't been the same since. Now, when you and I were in the Capitol Press Corps covering what was going on under the Capitol Dome, of course we covered both sides of the story. It was easy. You know, if you had a political issue, it was easy to know when people were testifying to a committee for that issue, against that issue, when legislators were standing on the floors of the Senate or the Assembly to argue for or against. And we tried to be fair, and that was the right thing to do, cover both sides. But, you know, after I was a reporter for 20 years, but then I went to grad school, studied the intersection of media and politics, and I learned that a lot of stories in the media, including stories by me, are one-sided almost by definition. Crime stories are one-sided. When you're covering a fire on the phones and you're talking to a spokesman for a CAL FIRE, you know, are you going to get the other side when that spokesperson tells you how big the fire is and whether or not it's going to be contained in the next day or two? No, you go with what they tell you. And, you know, that works fine when we have institutions that are trustworthy and authority figures that are trustworthy. But it goes south when they're untrustworthy or when they lie, when they say that COVID is a hoax, that climate change is a hoax, that, you know, a candidate says that FEMA is hurting people in Florida instead of helping these hurricane victims. No, there are not two sides to that story, and it would be wonderful not even to cover those lies at all. And I just say one other thing really quickly. When you try to correct the lies, we have something called the, what is it called? The repetition effect, I think, something like that. And what it is, mere exposure effect. That's what. And what it is that when you repeat something, even if you're debunking it, people will remember what you said. They will remember the lie, but they might not remember the context that you were saying that it was a lie and it wasn't true. And the mere exposure effect says the more we hear something, the more familiar it becomes, the more commonplace it becomes, and the more inclined we are to believe it. So correcting those lies is an issue in itself.
So let me ask you, Wayne, do you agree with that it is appropriate on occasion, maybe often, to not be fair in regards to a political candidate or issue?
In my experience, the more I disliked a candidate, the more fair I tried to be. You just kind of bend over backwards, so you don't want to be accused of having any kind of desire to make them look bad. So I would always give them the extra mile. My line to everybody was, I'm an equal opportunity antagonist. I'm not going to ask the easy questions. I'm going to ask the questions that need to be asked. And often, I mean, sometimes I'd never wanted to be a platform for these, you want to call it lies, you could call it lies, or for these positions, if you want to call it positions. But the role of a journalist is to recognize that stuff and then to ask the tough question that brings out a better response. I mean, I never used this answer, but a friend of mine named Ray Farkas at NBC had a great trick when he was talking to politicians and they started going along the line and giving him, well, may I say BS? He would finish, the politician would finish, and Ray would look him in the eye and go, really? That one word oftentimes got them going and got them going. Something else Rebecca said, I'd like to add to this, lack of institutional trust. And it is a major problem. It is the problem. We used to be 20 years ago, you had in San Francisco, you had Channel 2, you had Channel 4, you had Channel 7, you had Channel 9. Were there any others? I don't really remember that there were. You had some on the other side of the dial. You had some of those, but there weren't a lot of channels. There weren't a lot of newspapers, and that was the case all around the world. Well, now we have potentially billions of channels. Everybody can be his own channel, but the difference is we did the work, and we're credible. But a lot of other people just get on there and vent, and they get a following, and all of a sudden they're taken as gospel and as truth. And as a result of that now, the trust in our institutions have really broken down. The courts, half this nation now doesn't believe that the Supreme Court is credible. Politicians, half these Americans don't believe politicians are credible. Traditional media, I hate to say it, but when I suggested to a friend here in North Carolina the other day about something I read in the New York Times, his response was, oh, the New York Times, it's a liberal rag. Where I grew up, the New York Times was gospel. So nobody knows who to trust anymore. They simply go to where they get the information that confirms what they believe. And everybody has a different truth. And how do we function where everyone has a different truth from a different source? I mean, it is chaos. I don't know if that's the answer to your question, but that's where we're at.
Yeah. So let's segue to misinformation specifically, and I want to ask Veranda. As an investigative reporter, you must come across lies, stalling, also miscommunication, all sorts of problems. Tell me about that. Is that very prevalent for you?
Yes, especially with the emergence of artificial intelligence, things have gotten even worse. You can't really believe what you see. You can't really believe what you hear because, there are artificial intelligence tools that can copy someone's voice and make them say something that they've never said. And it's really, as Wayne mentioned, it's chaotic. One of the reasons why I got into investigative reporting was because look around, and to Wayne and Becky's point, people don't know what to believe. And at the time I thought, well, if I can get it in documentation, if I can get something, in a court record, or I can get something in an email that can really be hard for a politician to wiggle out of, then that's the path towards getting people to understand what you do and trust what you do. I still believe in that. And, I try to do the best I can, but I have to say it's harder now than ever, I think, with just the emergence of technology to get in front of lies and try to inform the American public or even our local communities in a way that's meaningful and in a way that they trust. And it's a daily effort.
Do you feel confident that you can identify misinformation or disinformation when you see it?
I think I am pretty confident. I spend a lot of time, a lot of news comes to us through social media nowadays. I'm always very suspicious. I'm an equal opportunity cynic, right? I'm always suspicious about things. And I'm always wondering, why am I being fed certain information? Whether it's what's trending on Twitter or what's on Instagram, sort of why are these things targeted towards me? And sometimes I have to say, I'll go down a rabbit hole of bots and realize that, people making comments are not people at all. They're robots. And you can tell by some of the language and some of the things like that. But, I'm not perfect, and it's hard, and it gets harder every day to be able to decipher what's real and what's not. I often, if I get sources and people send me things, I spend a lot of time trying to find the metadata in documents and things like that to try to validate that things are what they say they are. And there have been instances of government officials, fabricating documents. So that's not a clear, that's not a fireproof way either, but we all try.
So let's dig in a little bit deeper on fact checking. As everyone knows, I'm sure, the ABC debate between the presidential candidates saw the moderators fact check Donald Trump 4 times. And it led to really a viral moment after Trump falsely accused Haitians, immigrants in Ohio, of eating pets.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country. And it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country. And if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, will end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from television.
But the people on television saying their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that.
Was David Muir right in interrupting and fact-checking?
This stuff makes me crazy. I mean, we used to be where we never reported rumors. We never reported lies. We never reported people lying as such. But now we propagate that. We gave that candidate a license to lie on national television. And we had every right, David Muir had every right to fact check him. Of course, David Muir, and they were then accused of being very biased and saying that Donald Trump's people, that they walked into a trap. If a candidate refuses to go on a national magazine show because he refuses to be fact checked, that's a problem. If he refuses to go on a program because he insists that they apologize for questions they asked him in 2020, that is a fact check. You have to trust the media to ask the right questions. We are, look, I was on a bus with a guy, right? And it turned out he was a preacher, and we're talking. And he said, I go by the gospel. I go by the Bible. I go by the word of Christ, all of that. And I said, that is your gospel. I said, we were both writers. I said, our gospel is the truth. And journalists are pretty good at seeing the truth. I mean, I didn't have yet to, in 44 years of working in newsrooms, more than that, actually, more like almost 50. Not once did any person I worked with say he was a Democrat or a Republican. We don't sit around in morning meetings and say, okay, let's go out and get this guy today. We do the story that's out there. You know, if there's blood in the water, we don't care whose blood it is. We're gonna go get it. But this is we've gone down a slippery slope here. So the fact check was not biased, and he was doing his job. And to be accused of being biased for doing his job is a problem.
And of course, Mr. Trump also suggested that the FCC look into punishing ABC for doing that.
Well, now he's also saying that CBS is suspect, and you know CBS isn't taken out real seriously. But I mean, this is bullying by the people we're interviewing.
Let me talk about CBS and CNN, because when they held debates, and I want to get Becky's take on this, when they held debates, they did not fact check. And they basically said, let the candidates fact check. And there is a school of thought that if you don't bring up some of these issues and some of these lies and misstatements, then you deprive it of oxygen. What do you think?
Well, on CBS, they did post a fact check later with about 18 different things. And those things in some cases said that Vance gave misleading information or false information, but they also talked about Walz, and often they would say he gave factual information. It was true. And so they put it all together. And so the thing is with television, you know, it is a medium that's a hot medium. And if you're going to then do your fact checking in print form, in text, that's just not going to attract the same viewership. You know, for that, ABC, let's see, for the CBS debate, there were about 43 million viewers. So those viewers aren't going to ever catch up with the fact checking that CBS did literally after the fact. And in that debate, we saw Vance saying, this was the vice presidential debate, we saw Vance saying that Trump peacefully turned over power on January 20th, and that stood. Nobody said, wait a minute, you were fomenting an insurrection on January 6th and encouraging disruption of the counting of electoral votes in the Capitol. And it turned violent, you know, that there was nothing to keep viewers from just accepting that, oh, peaceful transition of power on the 20th. And also, Vance said that Trump could have ended Obamacare, but instead he chose to make it work, when in fact, Trump had sued to try to end Obamacare and lost. So there were instances, just like with the ABC debate between Trump and Harris, that really should have been checked in the CBS debate between Vance and Walz. And they were left to stand, and, you know, it's just wrong.
You know, I think we should probably point out now that this idea of misinformation is not anything new in this country. And as a matter of fact, misinformation and disinformation and outright lies in politics goes back really to the founding of this country. In 1800, the Hartford Courant said that if Thomas Jefferson is elected president, that murder, rape, incest, robbery, and adultery would be taught and practiced. Now, fast forward to today, and we have social media and the tech giants spreading rumors like that, or like the others that we've heard of, around the world in seconds. And there's really not too much we can do about it. Anybody want to comment on that?
The problem here is you hit it on the button. I mean, as I said earlier, we used to have a few channels we could control, but when there are millions or potentially billions, something goes out on Twitter, we understand the word viral now, what it means, but it doesn't spread in a few weeks or days. It goes out instantaneously. And if something appears on the internet, people will take it as fact, which is expressly frustrating, because once that genie gets out of the bottle, how do you get that genie back in the bottle? Again, they go for the facts they want to hear from the sources where they want to hear them. But but my problem and my concern is a continuing lack of respect for the people who do this for a living. I mean, that's hard. I mean, this used to be an honorable profession. People, you'd say you're a reporter and people would look up to you. You know, by the time I left, you know, we didn't feel all that honored or respected. I mean, we had people who would move away from us. I've been cursed out for being a reporter. I've had, you know, people, you know, physically attack me for being a reporter and simply asking those questions. So we are not, you know, we are not what we used to be. I mean, but you want to go back to fact checking. Most stations, they do a little bit of it, but there aren't many stations or websites or newspapers that have regular fact checks. I mean, some are, but the station I work with here in North Carolina, I work with their reporters. I'm a contractor. You know, they actually have a reporter who gets on every so often, fairly often, and fact checks big events. A few things anyway. Oftentimes the governor's race or whatever else is going on, but they have a rating scale. Absolutely true, not true, in between. But that's because that station has a huge staff. It's privately owned. They're not worried about budgets as much. And they do an incredibly credible job. You could take that TV station and drop it into any major market and it would do very well. But how many stations have fact-checking reporters? Do we have the money for a fact-checking reporter in most television stations? No.
I want to expand on that because that's a good point, because there is some good news. You know, in California, for example, we have a fairly new law where students in K through 12 are at least getting some media literacy instruction and hopefully some instruction to identify fake news. You mentioned the websites, you mentioned the TV stations. Some newspapers also have individuals who fact check, and that's their job. And so I guess my question to anyone on the panel is do you think that these news organizations are investing enough resources in this fact checking, realizing that many newspapers, for example, are you know, going under and having real problems?
Well, I'll just say this, Sacramento Bee a couple days ago, and this is manageable because it's small, but they fact checked an ad in the mayor's race. And it was a real easy story to read. It had good background by Teresa Cliff. And it said, here's the claim, here's the reality. Here's the claim, here's the reality, and a third claim and the reality. And it was just lovely to do. But when you look at, you know, say factcheck.org by the Annenberg School of Public Policy at the University of Pennsylvania, you know, you almost need a master's thesis to understand the long, detailed fact checking they'll do on something like a debate. It's really hard to get through that. So I think that the newspapers in their local settings, fact checking ads in campaigns is great. It's wonderful. It's a really good service. I think you'd be hard pressed to argue that they're obligated to fact check social media.
Miranda, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yes, I think a lot of newsrooms don't have the resources, you know, to really fact check. I also think that there's something lost in having reporters who are with a beat for an extended period of time. And a lot of times they can fact check in real time. Like when you're interviewing someone and they bring up something and you're like, that's not actually accurate. And I think that losing that expertise is also something that we're seeing play out in these sort of issues. And, you know, I fact check, you know, when I'm interviewing someone. Well, in California right now, it's hard to get, you know, bureaucrats to even sit down for an interview or even answer the phone. You know, they want all their questions sent on email. And so when you're trying to build your expertise, it's just hard to do. And it's hard to fact check someone when you're not an expert or you haven't been given the time to really develop yourself as a reporter and develop the sources to be able to do that in real time. And
especially if you're doing it live on television or on Zoom, I mean, this takes great skill and preparation. And that is something that, you know, there isn't that much of sometimes.
No. You know what I think did work well is the CNN after the debates. You know, they have all the pundits sit around talking, and they have a fellow named Daniel Dale who does their fact checking. And you said in the Trump-Harris debate that Trump was called out 4 times for his errors. But Daniel Dale said actually he made 33 false statements. Trump did. He said Harris made 1. Well, I think if you have a panel like that after the debate, and viewers are still interested in knowing, you know, how that debate came down and what people think of it, and then you have your fact checker come in, that's very effective, I think.
I'd like to ask a question for all 3 of you, and this I think really plays into the role of a journalist and a journalism organization. Have any of you unknowingly done a story, found out later that there's misinformation in there, probably from a source? And if so, how did you handle it? Nobody can think of one?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't call it misinformation, but I would call it evasiveness. I mean, we were talking about when you would call it a government official, and look, it is their job to speak out and respond to questions, but they become evasive about it, or they don't want to answer the question, or they want an email, and that's all really frustrating. You know, you would get a call, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes before air, so they can say, "Oh, we called back, we responded," and that's really not doing their job. So in that way, I think they're being evasive and not telling the truth. You know, the other one is where they say they want the question in an email. You got to hold them accountable. So you would ask the specific question you want, and what you would get from an airline, for example, is safety is our utmost priority.
Of course.
And that's what they say. You get that from airlines, you get that from utilities, you get that from everybody. But I used to get on there and on the tag, and I'd say, we also asked about this, about this, about this, and about this. And they did not respond or answer those questions. So you do hold them accountable to a degree.
And I would imagine, Baranda, because of the nature of your beat, you must get stonewalled all the time.
All the time, you know, and sometimes, you know, I've made mistakes, you know, I've written something and maybe didn't phrase it right. And I just hit it head on, you know, I'll say, I got this wrong, or this is what I was thinking and it wasn't right. I think that when journalists are honest about being human, you know, the audience resonate, you know, they begin to trust you even more, because we all, you know, make mistakes. When it comes to government officials, though, it has gotten worse, and to the point where people don't give their numbers. They want everything in email, and that is really not good for the democracy. And it's, you know, not good for taxpayers who want to know how their government, they deserve to know how their government is working. And I think it's only going to get worse from here.
So we have time for one last question, and if you could keep your answers short, but I would just like your final thoughts on how a journalist should handle misinformation or disinformation.
Well, I say the less attention given to it, the better. You know, as a print reporter, I just leave it out.
Wayne?
Put it in context. You know, if you have to say it, if you have to repeat it, put it in context, that's all. NBC News has been doing that quite a lot lately on their nightly broadcast. Put it in context.
Rhonda?
I say call a thing a thing. If it's not true, just say it's not true. No one knows what a falsehood is. We know what a lie is. Be honest with people.
By Rhonda, you had a great comment that there's a national story about how governments stonewall reporters. I mean, that's
I read it, and that's why I asked you the question.
It's, you know, I think that there is something to be done about the similarities between a single party state in Mississippi and a single party state in California. I mean, the things that I read that happen in Mississippi, where one party runs everything, is sort of the same things that we face, although on different issues in California, and it is mind-boggling.
You know, one question we didn't have time to get to, and I'll throw it out now and just to get your response, is that critics will say, and there are plenty of media critics will say, who's the arbiter of truth? I mean, who made you God to say what is fact and what is not fact?
Hey, you know what? If you go to the doctor and he says you're sick, he's the arbiter of truth. You might get a second opinion, but usually it's going to be the same opinion. Whether they like it or not, we in established media are the arbiters of truth. They just have to trust that we really go about being straightforward, talking to both sides, and being as honest as we can without an agenda other than telling the truth and shedding light on areas that need to be revealed. But we've lost that.
I was going to say, we have lost that. This country is so divided that, you know, the media is despised. And that goes back really, I think, probably to 2016 when Donald Trump started calling us the fake news media, right?
Oh man, don't get me started. That the day after that happened, some guy called me fake news. I mean, the First Amendment, freedom of the press, correct?
Yes, it is. It's still there.
And now, and so basically, he's running roughshod over the First Amendment of the Constitution. The press is there for a reason. Now, the press in the ideal form is out there to tell the truth. The reality is the press is also a money-making proposition. But anyone who accuses, for example, the New York Times of bias in their positions in not supporting, for example, Donald Trump, they have to consider that if Trump were in office and if he wins this election, they're going to get a lot of headlines and a lot of readers. So we really do try to tell the truth. I mean,
and the New York Times has been getting flack from both sides.
What's that?
The New York Times has been getting flack from both sides every time it comes out with some sort of a sort of an easy story on Trump. I mean, the letters to the editor and letters online and comments are, you know, the New York Times is sold out. I'm canceling my subscription. It is not what it used to be.
Right. The comments are the best part of most articles. You read. I mean, I read all kinds of newspapers. I read everything from the New York Times to Breitbart just to read the comments. I mean, you can't go to just one source. You got to go to all your sources because you know there's going to be a bend, a twist between one and another. But yeah,
I don't think we are clear on what a fact is. I was talking to someone or reading something that said, you know, former President Trump is authoritarian. And I was telling someone, I said, I'm not quite sure that the American public understands what authoritarianism is or what it means. And I think a lot of that goes back to education, basic education. People don't get the same quality of understanding how to look at what is a primary source, what is a secondary source, and how to decipher between fact and opinion. And I feel like it has become more of a problem, and it's just grown and grown and grown. And it's unfortunate because many people don't understand the difference between a journalist or a columnist, or what's an opinion and what's fact, or what's cable TV, and the difference in broadcast stations. We're in a scary time, I think.
How do we get the genie back in the bottle?
It's gone.
I think it's gone, and I think technology has made sure that it's gone. Thank you very much. Well, that's going to have to be the last word. And I think we all agree that the scourge will continue to grow as technology improves and it takes less time and more ease to get this disinformation out. So it will be up to reporters and editors and producers and others in the news business to be vigilant in separating fact from fiction. I'm Steve Swatt. We hope you enjoyed the program.